Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're talking about the state of Michigan and some news in its 2026 Senate race where Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate Joe Tate has officially dropped out of the U.S. Senate race. Now this article that I'm reading by AP News goes over the latest developments here where the Detroit lawmaker is officially dropping out of the race to represent Michigan in the U.S. Senate. He announced last Friday, leaving 3 Democratic frontrunners to compete in the primary. State Representative Joe Tate, who was the first black speaker of the Michigan House of Representatives, told the Associated Press last Thursday that he is suspending his campaign to move in a different direction of service. He was struggling to compete with the fundraising numbers put up by the other 3 Democratic candidates, U.S. Representative Haley Stevens, State Senator Mallory McMorrow, and Public Health official Abdul El-Sayed. This race is likely to be one of the most watched in 2026 as Republicans seek to defend their majority in the U.S. Senate. The past 3 months have been wonderful, just to touch base with Michiganders, Tate said of his campaign. So this is very interesting because when you talk about some of the most important Senate races in 2026, Michigan is one of 3 that I currently have listed in the toss-up category right now, along with North Carolina and the state of Georgia. Now, Michigan has been one of the closest states in American politics in recent years. At the presidential level in 2024, it helped Donald Trump win back the White House by being one of the 3 Rust Belt states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, that helped deliver President Trump the White House. Now, Michigan, in its 15 electoral votes, voted for Trump by 1.4%. And when you look at the actual vote numbers, that ended up equating to Trump winning in the state of Michigan by roughly about 80,000 votes, which 80,000 votes certainly sounds like a lot, but in a state like Michigan that has a few million votes here, I think, are combined about 5.5 million votes between President Trump and Kamala Harris. That's 80,000 is really not that much of a large margin. So a very close race at the presidential level. Still very impressive that President Trump won it after he lost it in 2020 against Joe Biden by 2.8%, and he narrowly won it in 2016 by 0.22%. And don't forget, before President Trump came along back in 2012, Michigan was a likely Democratic state. Barack Obama won it against Mitt Romney, who Mitt Romney's father was from Michigan. He grew up in the state. Obama still won it by 9.5%. Now, that was an improvement from 2008 when Obama won it by 16.5%, but Romney really wasn't able to make it super competitive. Trump in 2016 was able to pretty much shock the political world and win the state. And then in 2024, Trump won the state again. At the Senate level, in 2024, Michigan was even closer. The Senate race between Democrat Lisa Slotkin and Republican Mike Rogers ended up being a 0.34% margin of victory. Where in this race, Slotkin only defeated Rogers by roughly around 20,000 votes. So an even smaller margin of victory in the Senate race, what ended up being a very close race here, where Slotkin got 48.6%, Rogers got 48.3%, and technically neither candidate broke 50%, so a plurality margin of victory is what ended up happening in the state of Michigan. Now, at the governor level, it's a little different, where the current governor is Democrat Gretchen Whitmer. She won re-election in 2022 by 10.5%, but that is an open race in 2026. We expect that race will be a lot more competitive, especially with Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan running. It will likely be a much smaller margin of victory in that one. So the Senate race is expected to be very close in 2026, just based on how the recent elections in the state have gone. Now, as the backstory on this race, the incumbent Democratic Senator Gary Peters, who was eligible to run for a 3rd term but chose not to do so, is leaving the race to be open for 2026. And lots of candidates on the Democratic side are jumping at the opportunity to run. The 3 most notable candidates of the 4 in the race right now are Abdul El-Sayed, who is the former Wayne County Health Director from 2023 to 2025 and a candidate for governor in 2018. State Senator Mallory McMorrow from the 8th District, and U.S. Representative Haley Stevens from Michigan's 11th District. And there also is a potentially very interesting wrinkle that could be thrown in here, where Dana Nessel, Michigan's Attorney General, has expressed interest in running in this race, though she has not officially made a decision yet if she'll be entering or not. But if she did enter this race, that can certainly shake things up as well. 2 other Democrats are listed as possible candidates, but have not been given any indication if they'll run. And now with Joe Tate withdrawing, we see that the Democratic primary field for now is a 3-way race between Abdul El-Sayed, Mallory McMorrow, and Haley Stevens. And this is starting to get really interesting because some of the battle lines are essentially being drawn here. Abdul El-Sayed has already gotten the endorsement of 2 very well-known progressive Democrats, Bernie Sanders, the U.S. Senator from the state of Vermont, and U.S. Representative Ro Khanna from the state of California, who's also maybe potentially running for president in 2028 as he's kind of going around the country endorsing a lot of younger Democrats and setting up his own 2028 ambitions. Whereas Mallory McMorrow has gotten the endorsement of several state senators and state representatives on the Democratic side. Haley Stevens has gotten the endorsement of the former governor of Michigan, James Blanchard, and U.S. representatives, most notably Hillary Scholten and Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House. So it's interesting that it's setting up to be sort of a Democratic primary where you have the farther left, like the most far left voters probably supporting Abdul al-Sayed. Then the most, I would say, establishment Democratic voters, not necessarily moderate, but the most establishment Democratic supporters of like the last 20 or 30 years or so supporting Haley Stevens. And Mallory McMorrow's campaign is sort of in between Stevens and Abdul al-Sayed, not as establishment as Stevens, but not as far left, depending on the supporters, as Abdul al-Sayed. So it's a very interesting primary to see how this is all going. Now, for money, the leading three candidates all have raised a pretty considerable amount of money, but unfortunately Joe Tate was not anywhere near the levels the other candidates were at. Abdul al-Sayed raised about $1.8 million. Mallory McMorrow has raised about $2.15 million. Haley Stevens has raised about $2.8 million. Joe Tate was not able to break $200,000. In the early polling that's been done thus far, only 3 polls have been conducted, but they all showed in the polls that included Joe Tate, he was not making a very significant impact on this race. The Global Strategy Group poll from back in May to June only had Joe Tate around 4%, and the most recent poll from the National Republican Senatorial Committee only had Joe Tate getting 1%. Now, there is still a considerable amount of undecided votes in this race, but even if they were all to go to Joe Tate, which would not happen, it's not usually how undecided voters break, Joe Tate would still probably have a pretty tough time at winning this primary, so he suspends his campaign. Now it's a 3-way race between Abdul al-Sayed, Mallory McMorrow, and Haley Stevens. And this is going to be very fascinating to watch. The Senate primary is completely wide open right now. Haley Stevens has held a narrow poll over all 3 of the polls that have been conducted, but 2 of them have been under the margin of error, and they could all be very, very close to watch for leading towards the primary day. On the Republican side, former U.S. Representative Mike Rogers and nominee for Senate in 2024 is running again, and after the announcement from Republican Bill Huizenga, the primary is essentially all but cleared for Mike Rogers. He'll be facing off against one of these Democrats in the general election. Rogers already has the endorsement as well from President Donald Trump and U.S. Senators Tim Scott, John Thune, and John Barrasso, 3 of the top Republicans trying to get more Republicans elected to the U.S. Senate in 2026. Now, as for the hypothetical polling, this race is listed as a toss-up from Cook Politico report, Inside Elections, and Savos Crystal Ball, 3 highly respected political prediction websites, and it shows a little bit of a varying degree of matchups, though all of them are close. For Stevens versus Rogers, it shows a very close matchup where Haley Stevens is leading by around 1 to 2 points. Abdul al-Sayed versus Mike Rogers, Rogers is leading by about 6 points on the first round of voting, and then Mallory McMorrow versus Mike Rogers, Rogers is leading by about 4 points. So it shows Rogers would start out with a very slight edge against al-Sayed and McMorrow, whereas against Haley Stevens starts out with a very narrow edge against Mike Rogers. So this is going to be a very close race and a very fascinating one to watch. Now, as for the 2026 Senate map, Michigan right now, you can really go either way with it, whether you're giving it to the Democrats or the Republicans, and I think it is really very dependent on which candidate wins. My own current predictions right now is it ends up being Mike Rogers versus Haley Stevens, and if that were to happen, it ends up being Michigan in the lean Democratic category, which is in between a 1 and a 5% margin of victory. That's how I currently have Michigan going right now. If Abdul al-Sayed ends up winning, then I have Mike Rogers narrowly winning this race by under 1 point. But for right now, I'm leaving Michigan in the lean Democratic category. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. If you did, leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts and any other video ideas you would like to see me cover. That'll do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in a future video.